Most companies don't realize that bad UX shows up in support ticket patterns before it shows up in their metrics. As more organizations lean into greater automation, a poorly designed UX results in slowdowns and user frustration as support teams scramble to respond to a surge in support tickets. If you are in charge of enterprise systems or evaluating new IT installations, then this is the podcast for you. I'm Jane Singer, and welcome back to A Seat at the Table. In each episode, we sit down with leaders, innovators, authors, and entrepreneurs so that we can learn best practices that will empower our businesses. Today, we're joined by the brilliant Tanya Donska. Tanya works with companies like Deutsche Telekom, IQVIA, and DE Shaw Group, fixing UX problems at enterprise scale where one bad flow impacts thousands of users, and support costs alone can justify a redesign. In this episode of A Seat at the Table, Tanya will be discussing the hidden cost of UX debt at enterprise scale when just fix it later costs 6 months of engineering time. How to make design decisions with 17 stakeholders without everything becoming beige or taking 9 months. And why design systems fail at 90% of companies. And it's not a lack of documentation. Wow, there's so much to unpack here. Let's sit down with Tanya and find out what UX band-aids might be hiding at our organizations. Tanya, I am so excited to have you with us here on A Seat at the Table. What you are talking about today is really interesting. I think that there's a lot of myths and illusions and so forth around tech development. So I'm excited to dive into this with you.
Thank you, Jane. Thanks for having me. And I'm really excited to share some insights and expertise about product design.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that, it's really interesting because you talk about the fact that when you're designing something with about 100 users and then trying to scale it up, that it's not always a straight trajectory. Can you discuss that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that's true. Like what breaks when your product scales from 100 to 10,000 users is very interesting because everyone thinks that scaling is about infrastructure or databases. But from my experience, UX breaks first, and it breaks in ways that you can't see it in the analytics. Complexity really cripples in, and it waits until you are committed. So I worked with this international telecom company on their data portal. And so basically it's for scientists and business stakeholders across national companies, and they've used this platform and it worked well at 200 users. But when it hit 1,000, so people just stopped, and it became like a classic scaling problem. So problem wasn't just about navigation, and it was about the users, the data scientists who were spending, I think, more time verifying data sets than actually analyzing anything. And business managers, they just couldn't see what projects existed. And the design brief was to make it usable, but when I looked at it, the design wasn't actually the problem. So they built it using iterations, and every team adding their workflows, their data types, their edge cases. So nobody have ever stepped back really and organized what's already existed. And it's like 11 people each adding rooms to a house without consulting an architect. So it's like technically functional, but navigation and UX is just a nightmare. So what I did, I didn't redesign anything. I just spent more time looking at what they have and mapping like what was designed already and yeah, so this confused everyone. And like when they ask, like, when do we see the nice designs, the pretty mock-ups? And it wasn't the issue really. So yeah, and after I reorganized the architecture, the user architecture, the result was like 40% increase in adoption in 6 weeks, and so teams could actually find what they need and see collaborate with email chains and because the navigation improved. So yeah, pretty screens, they don't always what's needed really. And so here's what actually breaks um, when you scale. And so basically it's pretty simple, I think. So when navigation designed, let's say for 5 features, and now it has 47. So users can't find anything, and your team, your supports team, answering the same questions. How do I do this? How do I do that? Yeah, and then so there are also edge cases that become primary cases. So at 100 users, one person has like 1,000 whatever items in their list. And this is an edge case, but there are 10,000 users, your edge case now becomes like a case for 1% of users. And yeah, and so the workflows that seemed obvious, they just stop working. And yeah, that's like turns out obvious was just familiar to people exactly like us.
So in other words, you had to go in and streamline some of it, cut out some of the steps or processes or additions, and just try to find what was the core and make that more solid. Is that the case?
Yes, absolutely. You just have to take a look at the bigger picture, right? To test all the user flows again and see what works. And actually to talk to users who like have like different workflows at the enterprise scale. So yeah, it's basically about information architecture. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's really interesting. Now, you mentioned that oftentimes that one of the challenges is you have multiple stakeholders, right? And everybody sort of has a finger in the pie, and they all want their thing that they want. How do you manage that, right? And come up with a product that, you know, is workable, is an elegant solution, and yet please everybody who needs to be pleased.
Well, I can tell you to start with, it's not possible to please everyone. That's for sure. So I once had a project with, I think around 17 stakeholders across different stages. So three of them, they had like veto power no matter what anyone else thought. And 2 months later, we still hadn't approved a single design.
Mm.
And this is why enterprise projects take like 9 months and end up huge. So here's what happens with too many stakeholders. So basically everyone wants their feature prioritized. So there's a VP of sales who wants the dashboard show a pipeline. So there's also VP of customer success who wants to improve their support metrics. And there's a VP of product who wants improve user behavior. So you end up like with a dashboard showing everything, which means it shows nothing useful. And
Right.
also, yeah, and also it like loads in 14 seconds because everything like queuing 6 databases at the same time. Um, yeah, so I think yeah, design by committee, by a huge number of people produces a compromise and it doesn't achieve really a clear design goal. So one person could say make it look bold, another can says make it subtle, and you end up with something that neither bold or subtle, and yeah, and it's just great. So yeah, I think so. Every stakeholder basically thinks their users are the primary users. And so sales, they think that products for closing deals, support things, it's just for reducing support tickets and product management things. It's just for activation. And they just all optimizing for different outcomes, really. So every design decision becomes a negotiation. And yeah, usually won by whoever has the loudest voice or most political capital, which is a great design process. So yeah, so actually, like there are two things that, from my perspective, that actually work. So you just need to find a person who has the final say, right? So everyone ways is just they have an input, but not an approval. And to be honest, I don't take projects anymore without knowing who this person is. So yeah, and I think like it also important to know that you don't need to show 17 stakeholders three design options and ask what they prefer. Because it doesn't actually work. It brings you nowhere, and you can just show one design, one solution to a problem, and explain why, and let them criticize it. And yeah, because just asking which option, it just guarantees a lot of months of debate, to be honest. Um, yeah, and so I think also the other option is just not to take a project. So I have a limit now. It's just four stakeholders maximum at a time, and it's just not negotiable. Because yeah, because managing stakeholders is also a design work, and you can't really manage 17 effectively, right? You can't reduce 17 voices to one. So yeah, I think it's just you need to find one person in a room who actually can have an approval of what to do.
I think you're absolutely right. I mean, I've had the same experience. I'm not a software developer, but in the projects that we do within the context of media, you're right. Unless you have a point person and that person, you're dealing directly with them and they have the final say, it becomes a runaway train. So I think it's smart advice that you have to put a fence around it. Only show one example, like you're saying, and then let's work off that one example. And it otherwise, like you said, it gets very messy. There's a million different things that you can iterate on, and people will go nuts with everybody with an idea of let's do this. What about that? No, let's go back to the way we did it. And you're right. It's a mess. Now, you mentioned that, typically we think about development in the software or tech side of things as move fast and break things, right? It's always a high-speed thing. But then when you talk about regulated industries, you can't really apply that. Talk to me a little bit about that. How does that work?
Yeah, I mean, it's a completely different world, to be honest. So there's a lot of regulated industries. It's, for example, biomedical research, financial services, government, and yeah, they have a lot of constraints. So to give you an example, I once worked with a company that does so basically they do clinical trials, and I was working on the clinical trial portal. So yeah, it's the design brief was pretty straightforward. Just make it intuitive for our users. Yeah, and it was make it to a researcher so a researcher can't accidentally unblind trial data. But if you unblind trial data, the entire study is invalid. So it's years of work, it's millions of dollars gone. So no pressure. So every design decision has like implications. So would we use a drop down? It depends. If the drop down affects data entry, that's a protocol deviation. Could we add a shortcut? Also depends. If it bypasses audit trial, that's not compliant. So Yeah, and so this changes how you actually design. So you can't really, in regulated industries, you can't really test and iterate. So every change requires validation. It requires documentation, sometimes reapproval from regulatory bodies, and yeah, and just quick A/B test. It just doesn't work because it has 6 week review.
Right.
So by the time you get an approval, you've forgotten what you were really doing, what you were testing. And yeah, and to be honest, so users don't want efficiency in these industries, they just want compliance. So
Mm,
let's say in the consumer apps, it's just fewer clicks equals better.
mhm.
In regulated industry, those extra clicks, they add safety checks, right? They just removing them doesn't make it better. It makes it probably potentially illegal and expensive and very
Mm,
expensive. Um, so so the UI, the user interface, has to explain itself in the audit. So years from now, someone might ask, why did the user make this choice? And your interface has to have enough context that the audit trail makes sense. So every button label is evidence. Every confirmation dialog is documentation. So yeah, and the design challenge is actually, so basically you're designing for three audiences simultaneously. So the user, like let's say doctor or researcher, analyst, and the auditor reviewing the process months later, and the regulator checking compliance basically. Yeah, and so consumer design on the other side optimizes for one thing only, and regulated design has to satisfy basically all three without making compromises. And yeah, so I think that the key takeaway for me is that if you only designed the consumer apps, you'll design something elegant that gets the company fined, because I mean regulated industries need designers who understands constraints. That constraints actually features and not bugs.
right. Yeah, I think that's really interesting to be able to differentiate why each app is done differently depending upon the market that it's addressing. You don't really think of it that way if you don't work in the industry. So I'm really glad you brought that up. Now, you say that 90% of design systems fail, right? Or they fail at 90% of companies. Not 90% fail, they fail at 90% of companies. And it's not because of a lack of documentation. Can you explain what that means and why that's the case?
We're going to take a quick break now, and then we'll be right back.
We were hiring when we were making 50 to 100K monthly losses.
And why? Welcome to episode 1.
I can't think of a single founder who's been around for a decent amount of time in business who hasn't had their tunnel of year. This was that year. We're going to be okay, yeah, Sheree. Some are going to hear this and think, you TDP. But hear me out. You only have to do the math to understand that very soon we were $500,000 down.
Yeah, absolutely. So every like to start with, I think when you're a startup, so every company at like 200 people decides they need a design system, or even less. It doesn't matter. So most of them fail. So because the design system, I mean, it's supposed to bring order and structure, but they fail, from my experience, not because the design systems are bad, but because a few people use them actually. So to give you an illustration of how it usually goes, of what I've seen, is that company hires a designer to build a design system. So designer creates the beautiful components in Figma, and documentation is perfect, and everything is great. It's consistent. Design team is happy, and engineering team is not really it's not really happy. So, and the second year, so developers, engineers, they start hard coding custom components instead of using the system. It happens sometimes, and product managers are just bypassing it because this feature is different. Every feature is different somehow, and designers are frustrated, and yeah, nobody really respects the system. So leadership's confused why they're paying for this design system, which actually nobody uses. And third year, so the design system is maintained, but it's really functionally ignored. So half the product uses, half doesn't. Now you've got two design languages instead of one, and the problem becomes worse. So I've been thinking about why this actually happens, and here's my conclusion why.
Okay.
So design system sometimes, like most of the time, is built without developer input, especially on the early stages. So designer has made components that look great and Figma, but engineering team doesn't use it, or just components that are technically possible, but take 6 hours, let's say, to implement. So developers just don't. And also system doesn't handle real world edge cases. So designer creates, like, let's say, a table component, assuming 5 columns, and product needs 47 columns. So this component just doesn't work. And the design system. So if a product manager can ship features without using the system, they will, because it's faster and the management cares more about feature shipping, quick iteration than design consistency.
I think that's
And
it. Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
I mean, so what actually works is, so there's like three things that design systems can have to make it work. So, like, first thing is engineering, like the developers, co-ownership. So if system components are built by engineers and for engineers, not just in Figma, so documented in code, then developers would use it. And also, usually it's like better to start small. So don't build 50 components, build 5 that like cover 80% of use cases and make them mandatory. And also taking into account like different edge cases. So I think like most companies fail at design systems because they think it's a design problem, but it's actually a governance problem. So if you can't enforce it, don't build it.
Yeah, very good advice. I think that everybody has big dreams, and anything, as you say, looks possible when you're in the design mode, right? When you're, whether you're using Figma for designing user interfaces, or whether you're looking at a business plan in Excel, it always looks better than it really is when you have to actually execute on it in the real world. So I think it's great that you brought that up. Now, you talk about the fact that there's all kinds of band-aids that people use. For example, you point to tooltips that in some cases you could actually be lying to your users. Explain that a little bit, if you will.
Yes, tooltips. That's my favorite. So if your product needs a tooltip, it most of the times it means that your UI it's not very clear. So from my perspective, that the tooltips in most of the cases, okay, they just band-aids that hide a real problem. So because it means that just your interface doesn't explain itself. So like every time I do user experience audit for a product, tooltips are everywhere. However, this icon, if you hover over this icon to see what it does, click this question mark to understand this term. Tooltips on tooltips. It's like the products whispering, I'm sorry, I'm confusing every 3 seconds. So here's what tooltips actually mean. So it means that probably you've used unclear language. So let's say if your button says process, but users don't know what that means, instead of changing the button to say what it actually does, you add a tooltip explaining, and you've just doubled the cognitive load because people don't really like to read a lot. They just would like to do something really fast and do what they want. But now users have to remember that, okay, this button means something different. So, but they won't remember. And it also could mean that you're afraid to commit. So if you want the label to be short and elegant, but you also want it to be descriptive, so you make it short, then hide the description in a tooltip. And now users have to discover that this information exists, and most of them won't. And yeah, or it could be that this is a big one. If you are designing for your internal mental model, so you know what workspaces means because you built this feature, but it's really how it doesn't work for your users. They don't know this, so they have to read the tooltip, guess, try, fail, and yeah, then they email support asking how do they do this thing they were looking at. So the test I use is just turn off all the tooltips, and can still users complete the tasks? And if they can't, your labels are a bit broken. So yeah, just maybe fix the labels, not the tooltips. Sometimes you can add some help text. And yeah, so I think that there are a few other actually band-aids from my experience that hide the problems. So one of them is onboarding tools. So once you sign up for a new application, you got the onboarding tool, and it says, let me show you around. But it means that, okay, your interface might be a bit too confusing to figure out naturally or in the context. Another thing is help documentation. So of course, for enterprise, like big applications, it's necessary. But if you need to read a lot of documentation to do some simple tasks, it might be a problem. And yeah, also the support team, that's my favorite. If your support team answering the same question every day, yeah. And yeah, so I think like every time you add a tooltip, ask yourself, could I fix the underlying problem, user experience problem instead? And if yes, yeah, it's the way to go. So tooltips, I think, should be rather exceptions than the primary strategy in the design.
I think it's interesting because, yes, you're right. I do find with some programs I use that they're not very intuitive. And I think that what you're pointing to is that you need to optimize to make it intuitive as opposed to making it more elaborate. Even though elaborate seems impressive in the demo, but in the actual day-to-day using, it's frustrating. And as you're pointing out, it leads to a bigger burden on your support desk or any whatever you're using for support. Or if you don't have support, user frustration. So I think that it's good you brought that up, because oftentimes people think that more is more features, more elaborate design, when what you're pointing to really makes sense is make it easy to use, make it intuitive, and people will use it and they'll have a better experience.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, you talk about the fact that a different psychology is needed when you're designing things for enterprise use versus if you're doing B2B.
Yeah, I think it's that's true. So I've had experience working with both the enterprise and B2B, and yeah, that's true. So they are completely different. And sorry, I'm just trying to find my yeah, so they're completely different, and the psychology you use, it should be also different. So I think that for enterprise, so for the enterprise, you've got basically the different target audience. So they've got different workflows rather than for like in the startups. So if you mind, I need to find my notes because I
Oh, take your time.
I hope you will cut this out because yeah. Sorry. Yeah, sorry. That's okay. Yeah, so yeah, just to start with, so I think like the consumer apps, they basically optimize for delight. So enterprise apps optimize for not breaking the critical workflows. And I think the difference is like the boutique hotels versus Premier Inn in here in the UK. So completely different constraints. And yeah, and I mean, I do both. And here's what like the mental shift actually looks like. So basically, so I work with both startups and enterprise clients, and same week sometimes. And yeah, and I have to completely switch which part of my brain I'm using. So the startup brain says, like, does it feel right? Like, will the first time users get it? Can we create a momentum that clicks? And enterprise brain says, okay, will this break existing workflows? Have users memorized this path already? And so I made this mistake early on. So I took my startup approach into enterprise project and basically made the interface better, cleaner, like a few clicks, more intuitive. And yeah, and I mean, the existing users, they were not happy with that. And so because they actually memorized the old paths. So what I did as a designer, I destroyed their muscle memory and made them slower at their jobs. And then when I learned, my startup instincts tell me, okay, make it delightful, make it look nice. But my enterprise brain says, make it predictable. And so I think like both are right, but just in completely different contexts. And so I think like the hardest part when startups hit Series A and when they start scaling, so suddenly they've got like power users who are doing the same workflow 40 times a day. And I have to tell founders, we can't just redesign this anymore because people depend on it and they're using it every day. They know how it works. So this transition, this redesign breaks products if you are not ready for it. And so I think why it matters. And so enterprise users aren't exploring your product for fun, unlike like startups. So they're completing tasks under pressure. So let's say if you're talking, I just want to go back to the regulated industries, right? So if a radiologist reading like scans doesn't want a clever animation, so they want the same interface, the same like predictive place so they can work fast without too much, without figuring out how it works in the new design. And but so consumer apps can redesign the entire UI because the user like logs in once a day and adapt. And also, yeah, I mean, in the startup environment, it's just that's how they work. Like they iterate quickly and they test different ideas. But enterprise apps just can't because their users are in the app like 8 hours a day. And yeah, and really the adoption time costs, thousands of dollars in productivity loss. So like in my mind that different psychology really means a different success metrics. So in the like consumer startup world is engagement, delight, pretty screens, virality. And in the enterprise world is just different. It's task completion, training time, error reduction. So yeah, I mean, I think if you are just measuring, you should just measure the right thing to decide the right product.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And you're right, you don't really think about it, and it's very easy to get caught up in all the bells and whistles, right? To make it fun, to make it look like it's exciting, when, as you point out, and you're absolutely right, when you're doing this for work, you just want to get the job done as fast as possible because you got a lot to get done. You're oftentimes on deadline. And so you just assume have something that might not look too exciting, but it speeds you along, right?
Yeah, I mean, you get used to things, right? You just like if you're working with your mail client like all the time, you're replying to your emails, and you're used to how it works. But if you change, if design changes, okay, you now need to figure out like what's different, and it takes a lot of time
Yeah.
to get used to the new interface, basically.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, you say that everyone wants a designer that's someone like Apple's designers. And then you say that this could be the kiss of death for enterprise products. Why is that?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, just continuing our topic, yes, because again, it's just completely different metrics. So let's say Apple designer, right? Someone who works at Apple designs for like 500 million users, whatever, and these users they do the same thing, right? And but enterprise designers who work for enterprise companies who design enterprise products, they design for users like 5,000 users, 50,000, but they do 100 different things and it's a different problem. So let's say like when I often notice like the founders wanted to find designer who designs like Apple, like in Apple they do Apple products, and this actually means like make it look as good as Apple products. But the problem is Apple's design works because they control everything. So Apple controls hardware, software, ecosystem, and use cases. So so basically they just design for millions of people doing nearly identical tasks. So send a message, take a picture, play music. And on the other hand, enterprise products, they just can't do that because you are designing for different user roles and with different permissions. Like let's say an admin or analyst or someone who just needs to view something. And it's different workflows like clinical trials versus financial reporting versus government compliance. So different technical constraints, regulated industries, yeah, it's just different. And a designer from Apple brings assumptions that don't work. Like, for example, user will figure it out, and So enterprise users, they don't have time to figure it out. So they need, from what I've seen, just need to like the training time to be minimized, and or simply, or simplify by removing options. Enterprise users don't need those options. They just not nice to have. They're job requirements, and enterprise products can't be redesigned without months of validation, as I was saying before. So I think like the best designers for enterprise apps, they come from enterprise. I mean, they understand constraints, stakeholders again, compliance, and the fact that the elegant or something not like visually pleasing, it doesn't mean that it breaks a critical workflow.
It's interesting to hear you spell that out, because you're right. People assume that people coming from Apple are fantastic, which they are, but they're not fantastic in every use situation. And that for enterprise, some of what makes them great on the consumer side of things is actually detrimental if you're trying to bring that into enterprise. Now, talking about design, you talk about that you've seen companies waste a tremendous amount of money on design. What was the biggest waste that you've seen? What should they have done differently?
Yeah. So yes, I have a few examples from my past experience, and I think sometimes it's related to design systems. Most of the times it's related to design systems or redesigns. And so to give you an example, so first example is about design system actually. So let's say I had a project where a founder approved like elaborate new design system with like hundreds of components, documentation, and they just were not at the stage to make it happen. So they had two developers, and they were just both working on critical features and bugs, and just didn't have time to really collaborate with the designer. And 18 months later, maybe 30% of the design system was built, and the rest is just sits in Figma file, and they're just paying to maintain a system that they can't really use because they don't have a technical capacity that matches their design ambition. So I mean they wasted a lot of budget on something really that they can't achieve at the early stage. And I think so. Another example I had is that when a client wanted to redesign their onboarding flow, it's something we already touched. So the old version was not really nice, and it was like not really beautiful, but it was simple, just a few steps, and mostly it contextual. So when users do their task, it just explains how it works. And but the founders, they just wanted to redesign to make it look nice and more engaging, and to show some animations, and so the problem is that it was a very long onboarding flow after the redesign. So it took users like 10 minutes or something like that to go through all the videos, explanations, and the result was that basically their activation dropped, and they just tripled the onboarding time, and like fewer people like could even finish it. So it turned out that the users that don't really care about visually pleasing designs, they wanted fast. They wanted to do their things fast. So, and the old version was not very nice in terms of visual design, but it got them to their aha moments in just like a few minutes. But the new version was, it was just very long process, very tedious, and it just costed them a lot of money in the existing users, in the new users. So yeah, that's just a few examples, and I think like what usually you should do, like in this case, is just talk to users first to understand what doesn't work, because you're doing it for them, right? And you just don't just ask, does this look good? Because I mean, most redesigns, they fix problems that users don't really have, and it's really important to keep them in mind, to talk to them, and to understand what they really, really need.
As you're explaining that, I'm literally thinking of an app that I won't mention the name because it might be rude to mention the company, but it is absolutely beautifully designed on the front end, and it never works properly when you go to try to use it. It's always something. There's always login issues or issues doing what you need to do on the app. But it's absolutely beautiful compared to all of its competitors. It's a work of art. But then again, you didn't come there to see art. And so everything you're saying, it's like, oh yes, exactly right. I can see it now. And like I said, I won't mention the company because it wouldn't be appropriate. But you're right. You can't cover up a bad infrastructure or bad design with pretty pictures or, fun little, whatever it is on the app. People don't find that amusing, but they look at it, it looks good, and then they don't want to deal with it anymore.
Yeah, I mean, in the best case scenario, just combine the two when you have time, right? You can focus
Yes.
on making nice, make it playful, engaging, but it's always better to solve the real user problems first, and to
Yes.
make sure they understand and it's easy to use for them. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. Well, Tanya, you have shared so many interesting things. I've really learned a tremendous amount from you. And a lot of what you've talked about, while it is about doing development for tech products, it'll carry over into many, many other products, this framework of thinking. So I want to thank you so much for sharing and for being with us here on A Seat at the Table.
Thank you so much, Jane. It was a pleasure.
And I'll make sure I'll put your contact details in the show notes or in the description area on YouTube. And then people want to reach out to you, they'll be able to do so. And again, it's really been a pleasure.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. Thank you so much. Thank you for your time.
Thanks for being with us here today on A Seat at the Table. If you'd like to see some of the other episodes, head on over to our podcast website at seat.fm. That's SEAT.fm. There's also a link here in the show notes. And if you're thinking that you'd like to be a guest on the show, you'll find information on how to apply there as well. Thanks again for joining us. I'm Jane Singer, and I will see you in the next episode.